Okay, so I got a question about setting up a sort of a secondary control relative to an existing main control or an existing global control. So in this case, we have basically just a model of a pen, and we also have a cap. Now, let's say you want to be able to basically remove the cap and leave it detached from the main body of the pen and basically animate it, but also have the option of having the cap follow. So it's as simple as creating basically a follow control using constraints. So what I'm going to do quickly is I'm going to set up the base controls. So I'm going to select my pen, and just for the sake of possibly maybe changing out the model or updating it easily, I'm going to press Ctrl G on my keyboard to group the pen and then name it accordingly. So pen geo group. Remember, you always want to specifically name everything that you create, just to make it easier to specifically find things in the outliner, whether you're binding or anything else. So group and pen cap geo group. Okay, and for my pen cap geo group, I'm going to center pivot. So when I select the group, it basically just centers on the pen cap. You don't really have to do that, but it's just my preference to have everything basically align relative to the area it influences. Okay, so now we have our couple groups, and let's say I want this control to basically control the placement of my pen, so I'm going to click the control, and then I'm going to control or command select the group from my outliner, and then I'm going to constrain parent, go to the option box, make sure that it's maintaining offset, and this is just so that it doesn't change position or anything like that if my group wasn't zeroed out, for example. And I'm just going to add that in there. So it basically constrains the translates and the rotates, but I also want to do the scaling as well, just in case I need to change scale. So constrain, scale, and same thing, option box, maintain offset, make sure it's on, add that in there. And so now when I take the control, it will basically move around, move the geo, and I can also scale it. Okay, now repeat the same process basically for the main body. So my pen's grouped already, got my geo right there, got my main control for the pen. I'm going to again control or command select the geometry group after I've already selected the control, and again parent constrain and scale constraint. Okay, so now we have the pen following the main, and we have our cap following its small control group. Now what we want to do next is we want to set it up so that this control will follow this control, but we want to be able to toggle it on and off. So when we want to be able to easily keyframe the control without necessarily removing that influence or having to conflict with constraints. So what we're going to do is we're going to take this control and we're going to do a Control G to create a group around that control. So when I go to the outliner, you can see when I expand my group, you can see that I have the control inside of it. Okay, and so what we're actually going to constrain is I'm going to rename this first. I'm going to call this my cap CTL for control and GRP for group, basically cap control group. So what we're going to actually constrain now is we're going to constrain this group to the main control. So I'm going to select my main control and I'm going to just constrain it, parent constraint and then scale constraint. And this is so that the cap and the control for the cap will scale with my pen and move with it. Okay, so next step, we need to be able to basically toggle the influence of the global on and off. And so on the control, for the cap, I'm going to actually add another attribute. And so I'm selecting the control curve. You can either go to modify once you have that control selected and choose add attribute. And remember, right now I'm selecting the control curve, not the group. So the control curve directly right now. And I'm going to add something. We'll call this one cap follow. And I'll make an enum so that I can actually set up a couple of toggles. So the first one's always going to be the off, and the second one's going to be the on. So I'm going to label the first one, and we'll say world. And I'll label the next one pen. And then I'll add that attribute. And so I've added the attribute, but it's not yet set up so that it's actually connected to anything. Basically, I can toggle things, but nothing will change about the behavior. So now I need to make a connection between those two things. So you can do this a couple different ways. You could either use your node editor in the basically in the Hypershade, or you can open your connection editor. I'm going to use the connection editor just because it's a little quicker right now. And so you can go to Windows, General Editors, Connection Editor. Or what you could have done is you could, with the control selected that you want to influence, you can press Control on your keyboard, right click with your mouse, and choose Connection Editor. Make sure that you're clicking over the channels, the attributes that you want to influence or want to use when you're doing that in the channels box, and it'll basically just add that up directly into your connection editor. And what I need to add in here now is not the group, but I need to actually select the constraints that are created for that group in the outliner. And so I reload the right side and it loads those in. And so now I can select my cap follow. Make sure that in your connection editor, when you actually looking at it, that the from to has the from on the same side as your control and the attribute that you want to drive the constraints, and that on the to side or the input side that you have the constraints. And you want to make sure that you can see basically the weight value, which will usually reflect the objects being influenced. So in this case, it's the pen control that's being influenced and the pen control. Okay. Or should I say the pen control is influencing the group. And so that's why we're seeing pen control weight and pen control weight. And so we want this cap follow, select it, and then just all you have to do is left click on each one of those, and basically it activates them. So it makes the connection between the cap follow attribute and the constraints influencing it. Okay, and so right now if we select the cap and we go back to our channels box, you can actually see we have the cap follow, and right now it's set to world. So if it's set to world, that's the off position because it's the first attribute. So if I actually move my pen, you can see that the cap doesn't follow. And I'll just undo that, put that back to 0. Or actually I can do this and show you. If I select the control now and I switch it to pen, you can see that now the cap will basically snap to wherever the pen is. And the great thing is, since the constraint has been applied to the group around the control, you can still select the control, set keyframes on it, and not basically negatively impact the behavior of the constraint that's supposed to make it follow. Basically, you never want to have constraints applied to the same control where you need to have keyframes. While there are ways to get around that basically incoming overlap of control, it's an unnecessary problem to create for yourself.